Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt here with you today. Alex, why don't you tell us what this podcast is all about?
Yeah, this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today we have a really special guest and a good friend, Aaron Hoover, on the show. Aaron is the Ministries Pastor at Traders Point Christian Church in Indianapolis, a multi-site church. Aaron recently released the book, Anxiety, Depression, and Jesus, Finding Hope in All Things. Aaron's been married for 13 years to his wife, Megan, and they have 3 incredible sons.
And before we get to our conversation with Aaron, we want to let you know that this episode of the For Everyday Leaders podcast is sponsored by the Liston Lodge. The Liston Lodge is an event venue located in Hendricks County, just 35 minutes from downtown Indianapolis. The estate was a former 22,000 square foot gorgeous private residence, but is now a unique venue that features elaborate woodwork, unique chandeliers, a cozy and homing atmosphere, and beautiful secluded grounds. Actually, 100 acres of that. So whether for a special event, corporate event, or a wedding, visit listonlodge.com. That's listonlodge.com. Aaron, welcome, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
We met and connected in passing, I don't know, 8 to 10 years ago, something like that. And then we were talking about, I was complimenting you on something that wasn't you, which was a lot of fun. And we just thought we'd share that with you.
Yeah.
But heard so many great things about you, have so many like common friends, mutual friends. So really excited just to get to know you, get to know your story a little bit more. But you do know this guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I love Alex.
Thanks.
How long have you guys known each other now?
I mean, I've been on team at this point at Traders for 4.5, coming up on 5 years.
Wow.
And I probably met you prior. I was doing photography and volunteering, so I at least knew of you prior to that in photographing up at the North Campus some.
Yeah.
So
yeah, my first memories
first,
are when you joined the staff for sure. So
2018.
Yeah.
Good
That's
times.
awesome.
Look at us,
Long time ago.
2023 now.
I know.
Look at us now.
Wild.
Look at us now.
wild.
That's
Yeah.
fun. Well, Aaron, tell us a little bit, and I genuinely don't really know much of your story, so I'm really looking forward to hearing this. But tell us about where you grew up. What was life like for Aaron Hoover growing up, man?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here. Sure. I grew up in Northern Indiana. I am one of 6 kids. And so I grew up in a pretty Christian household. I'll say it that way. My mom has been an incredible influence in my life and a big part of my testimony, but grew up one of 6 kids in a church that was at the time very legalistic. And it was called Faith Assembly, and it really had a doctrine that was based on like faith healing. And growing up in that atmosphere, like there were a lot of challenges to that. All of us were born in the home. All of us had, we didn't go see doctors. We didn't take medication. And so I was very, very young in that church, but my oldest siblings grew up with that experience, and that shaped a lot of their experience even now. But it was an active home. I mean, we were, 6 kids, like it was crazy, but a pretty big variance in age between my oldest brother and my youngest brother. I'm 5th of 6.
Wow.
And yeah, it was a good childhood.
Tell us then kind of what, you put the foundation of your childhood, but then what were some of those things that you started to get interested in that maybe started to inform career interest or things that you cared about or things that mattered to you? What kind of started to set you on a career path of now you're, one of the pastors at this very large influential church, you're an author, like all these things. How did we kind of get there? And what were some of those initial career desires or things that really mattered to you, man?
Yeah. One of the biggest formative moments in my life was when I was 8 years old. I was messing around in the house with my younger brother, and we were playing football and just goofing off. And I had a leg injury that happened. And at the time, I obviously at 8 had no idea what was going on or what had happened. And I was one of those kids that would kind of fake injuries or fake sickness to get out of things. And so my parents for a couple of days didn't exactly take it super seriously. But I could not put any weight on my right leg.
Wow.
After finally convincing them that there was something going on, we went to the hospital, got some x-rays done, and they found that I had broken my right femur. And sitting on top of my femur was something that the radiologist and our family doctor thought was to be a tumor at that time. And so at 8 years old, I'm faced with this pretty striking reality of like, okay, I might lose my leg. At that time, I'm wondering, like, at 8, you can't process things super well. I'm like, am I gonna lose my life? Like, I don't really know what's gonna happen here. And I remember my mom just weeping when she heard the news from our doctor. So that hit me super hard. And we had an appointment to come down to Riley Children's Hospital in Indianapolis. It was a couple hours away, but it was a few days from that initial appointment that we had that found that on the x-ray.
Wow.
And all I remember about that season is my mom just praying so faithfully over me. She prayed for healing, and she prayed that God would intervene and that God would show up in a powerful way. And we came down to Riley Children's Hospital and met with the doctor. I'm thinking at that time, like, we're going to have surgery. All this stuff's going to happen, huge impacts to my life. And the doctor comes in the room and he's like, hey, I know we were thinking through initial scans and everything that this was a tumor. I think it actually may just be a cyst. And I want to take some time to wait before we operate. Let's see if we have to do something eventually, but it may just take care of itself. Over the next 6 months, we continued to get scans, and it never grew. It turned out to be a cyst, and
awesome.
God's faithfulness was just so present in that season. And so at 8 years old, I'm confronted with this truth of, like, God loves me, and he cares for me, and he's a healer, and he's powerful, and he hears our prayers. And that was a really, really big turning point in my life. And so as far as like a career path, I knew at that time, God had something for me. And I had no idea what that was going to be. I thought for a little bit, it might be that I'd be a doctor and I'd be able to give news to kids like that doctor gave to me. I didn't realize how much schooling that took and how much you had to love school to do that. Right. So to be a pastor, it's totally different. No. But I was, for several years, I was just like, God, you're going to use that. You're going to use that. And then as I grew up and through my adolescence, my parents got divorced when I was 11 years old. It was also a very big moment in my life. And from that point, I started to rebel some, and without a father figure in the home, really struggled through middle school and high school. And so I lost some of that calling and desire really to go make a difference. I was just kind of out doing whatever I wanted to do because I felt terrible about life and about home. And then I really felt like the Lord began in college a new work in me, just to say, hey, don't forget what I've done for you. Don't forget the faithfulness that I've shown, and I've got more for you out ahead. And so that's been, it's been a huge blessing to look back on that and see like a spiritual gift of faith that really started when I was 8 years old and got to be a part of all that. Yeah. So I went to Ball State University and began to study religious studies. I met my wife there, my sophomore year, her junior year.
Awesome.
We actually lived on the same floor of a dorm there at Ball State. So co-ed dorms, she was the next door down. So my boys will not be going to Ball State. I don't know why that was allowed, but I met my wife, and then as honestly, like the biggest motivation at that time to transfer out of Ball State was I wanted to get a job and start taking her out on dates and do fun things. And I had no money at all. And so I was like, religious studies at Ball State was really, really good for a couple years to get exposure to all types of different experiences and backgrounds and religions. And the philosophy courses there challenged me so much. That was so good for me. But after about 2.5 years, I transferred to Liberty University, did online school there while I worked. And that was the biggest motivator to go to Liberty at the time, was like, this is something I can do in addition to a full-time job. And so started working at FedEx office there in Muncie, and taking my wife out or my girlfriend at the time, out on dates, and got everything done that I wanted to in that time. But I studied religion at Liberty, and then after completing a bachelor's degree, stayed at Liberty and did a master's degree in evangelism and church planting. 2 degrees from Liberty. I've never been to the campus, so literally just all online, and that's what worked for that season of my life.
Yeah,
so,
that's incredible, dude. And I think there's just so much in your story that I think we could speak to, but really honing in on, as you transitioned out of school, you've got these degrees, you're dating. What was something in that season that was really this like moment that called you into like your first church ministry, your first time really getting involved in ministry, church planting, whatever it was? Like, what was something that really propelled you toward that?
Yeah, honestly, when I first started attending Traders Point, like I had these degrees and this experience, and I knew I had a calling on my life, but it very simply was like, man, God has been faithful to me. I believe he wants me to do something.
Yeah.
But I had no idea what that would look like or how that would actually, manifest itself. And so I was working just a normal job with a restoration company. I started as like a office coordinator, became an office manager, project manager over time. I was there about 5 years.
Okay.
And during that time was attending Traders Point. And so very quickly after beginning to attend Traders, I realized this was a place my wife and I wanted to be for a very long time. I mean, we were driving like 45 minutes to get there, driving past tons and tons of good churches on our way to Traders. But because that was the first one that we attended, we're like, this feels like home.
Yeah.
I remember one of the first services that we were in, the worship leader had stopped after a song and everybody was applauding, and he just stopped the whole service and was like, hey, just so we're all on the same page, when we applaud, like we are praising Jesus for what he's doing in this place. This is not at all about us or about me. And that was like very, especially considering the backgrounds we had in churches. Yeah. That was a very good sign that God was going to do something through Traders. So I reached out to Aaron Brockett, lead pastor, with one of the most cringy and embarrassing things that I've done in my whole life. I basically, after a few weeks of attending, I sent him an email. I'm like, hey, been attending your church, love it so much. About to get a master's degree, and here are all the reasons why you should hire me. I put my GPA in this email. Wow. Like it was bad.
I'm gonna have to go find this email.
I still have it. Right when I started at Traders, I showed him it, and I'm like, do you remember this? And but his response was so gracious. Like I can't even believe he got the email and then responded to it. You'd think there's some sort of filter for pride that like pastors' emails check.
Right.
No, he just responded and he was like, hey man, whether it's here or somewhere else, I know God's going to use you. If he's put that calling on your life, like he's going to use you in a special way. I would encourage you to stay connected, keep serving, do all, stay faithful, and God's going to use it. And so that really set up my time in ministry, because it was 4 years after that I got a job at Traders Point. And I never even applied for a job throughout that time span, but we were engaged and plugged in, and God just continued to use us and leverage that. And so,
that's incredible. I also want to go back and shout out that you were a project manager.
Yeah.
That I didn't know that. And that just gives me so much joy. I love that.
I think what's so interesting too is, there's a lot of times where people have like a very clear, like, this is the outcome I'm looking for. This is the thing I'm specifically desiring, or the target that I want to hit, or the role I want to have. And sometimes the story is more just like, I've just been faithful to set up an environment where I'm making good choices, and I got these degrees, and I'm working this job that's all right. And I'm serving in my local church, and something happens, right? You start praying maybe towards something. You send a a cringy email once in a while. But, I think that's just so, a lot of the cross section of people that we serve and our listeners, that those are some of the stories. Like, how do I put language to what I want to do and how I want to do it? And sometimes it is like, let's put this target out there and go after that and pray big and, connect with people. And other times it's like, all right, I'm just going to keep my character. I'm just going to keep using some of these skills. I'm going to keep serving others, and who knows what God's going to do with that. And I love that in your story. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. My target was honestly just be faithful, because I've heard people at times have a very specific target of like, I want to do this thing. I even had the question, I get to serve on our executive team right now. And I had a question a couple years ago from somebody, and they literally said like, how do you get on the executive team? And I said that the only way I know to get on an executive team is to never try to be on an executive team.
Yeah.
It's like, I just want to be faithful.
Yeah.
I just want to like do what's right in front of me today. And somehow after 8 years, without ever, wanting that or aspiring to that, God has me in the role that he has me in. And I'm very grateful for that. But it was never like, I want to be the ministries pastor. I want to be a campus pastor. In fact, there were many times when I was like, I never want to do that. I never want that role, because that terrifies me, or that I feel totally inadequate for that. And what I've seen is God just continue to open up doors and just invite me and ask me to go through the door. I talk with a lot of people who have, they're trying to discern God's will. And it's like, is this option God's will, or is this option God's will? And I think in my life, what God's done over the last 10 years or so is give me multiple good options that I'm very, very grateful for. And it's been clear throughout navigating those options that it's like, I think God's going to be present in both of them, in all of them. His presence isn't going to go away. And so his will is for me to choose one and be faithful and go and just continue to honor him in that leadership and that opportunity. So,
and I think in this upward mobility society, and the local church is not immune from that either, that is such a beautiful, simple way just to, what do we celebrate, right? Is celebrating that faithfulness, celebrating being faithful with whatever we've been entrusted to steward, right? And I think that is something that I think the idol of future self is something that I could see myself one day. I dealt with that a ton, and would like to think of myself as somebody who tries to follow Jesus well, but in my, early mid-20s, it was like, I see this is the outcome. This is what I desire. This is what I want to have happen. And not to say that desires can't be placed in your life or a calling in that way, but the way in which we go about it, and the way in which we, what are we trying to leverage, and why, and why did that get there, and why is it still there? And what is that preferred route that I'm trying to take, or to shortcut or whatever. And so I love just hearing that very clearly in your story, where you're like, I'm just trying to show up and be faithful and do this. And this is how these things happen. In a culture that says, be the loudest in the room, always take every opportunity that's yours and grab it by the throat, So that's really refreshing. That's cool, man.
Yeah. So Aaron, one of the things we love to talk about on this podcast is these everyday leadership principles that in your course of your career, from being a project manager to now being a ministries pastor, what is something that you've learned along the way that's just been an everyday leadership principle that you could share with the people who listen to this podcast?
Yeah, I heard several years ago, I wish I would have had it back when I was serving as a project manager and in the marketplace more, because I could have utilized it a ton more. But several years ago, I heard that there are 3 questions that every follower asks of their leader. The questions are, do you love me? Do you care for me? And can you help me?
Yeah.
And as I lead now, I think through those questions all the time, like in my conversations and my one-on-ones and opportunities that I have to be alongside other people. I'm always asking the question, do they know that I love them? Do they know that I truly care about them, not just the work that they're doing or the task at hand, but them personally? And then can I help them? And is it clear to them that I'm willing to help?
Yeah.
And that's the hardest one for me, because I'm leading people who I think are way better at their jobs than I would be in their job.
Yeah.
And so I think we have the best kids and youth pastors on the planet. And can I help them be a better kids pastor? I'm not sure. Like they know what they're doing. But I want to be there and be available to help if they ever need anything. And just for them to know, like, there's nothing out of bounds. There's nothing you can't bring to me. There's nothing we can't talk about. But really those first two questions, I think, really help provide a foundation for the third.
Yes.
Do you love me? Mm-hmm. Do you care for me? And I don't think those are church-based principles only. I think those, when I look back to my time in the marketplace and with the company that I was at before, I think, man, I missed so many opportunities to communicate that and to do that more. Yeah. And that's been such a valuable lesson for me of like, what are the priorities that I can give them? Yeah. Because I think sometimes that becomes so job specific that it's like, what do they need? Let me provide this, and this. It's like, first and foremost, especially by the people who have been leading me, the best thing they can provide me is a clear answer to the question, do they love me and do they care for me? Yeah. That's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's really, really good. And to that third question, I think something I've learned in that, in my leadership, because I would agree, like I get the opportunity to lead people I think are far superior at what they do than I ever would be. And it's that question of, can you help me? And how I've really tried to frame that with my team is like, hey, I want to help clear the way for you to do the thing that you're really, really good at. And so if you get stuck with an organizational thing, if you get stuck with a financial thing, if you get stuck with something that's going to interrupt you from doing the thing that God has made you to do and the craft that you're excellent at, that's the stuff that I want to do as your leader. Yeah. I want to help clear the way of those things so that you can run full force at whatever it is that we have you doing in the organization that you've been called to do. And that's changed my perspective of that question. Because before I used to feel like I couldn't lead someone whose job I've never done. I couldn't lead in a space that I've never actually worked in because I have nothing to offer them. But I think the reframing of that question, once you set the foundation of those first two, has been really, really pivotal in my leadership. And hopefully for the team I get to lead has shown them that I can help them in a way that maybe we never thought of before.
Well, and care and love builds an environment for trust. Yeah. And so then there is this, hey, I'm willing for you to help me and not feel insecure about it, and vice versa. And I think some of the questions that we always ask and we encourage people to ask is like, really, how are you? How can I help? Or how are you? What's bothering you? And then how can I help? But those things can't happen. And I love how you put that without that foundation of love and care. Yeah. Where why would I want to tell this person I work with? And I think that's the thing in everyday leadership is whether you have a title or a position or a team that you're managing, or you're just showing up in your kind of like first job, the opportunity to like look out and look outside yourself and serve others. Yeah. Those are questions. Those are things you can do regardless of position, title. Even if you're as a stay-at-home parent in the home with your neighbors, right? Like these are principles that like carry outside of like my formal work job and my one-on-ones. Like, yes, those things it informs those as well, but to really communicate care, love, can I help you? Man, how many times do we stiff arm people who are like, there's somebody who knew like our kids were homesick and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, can I send you a DoorDash? Can I do this? And I was like, this is awkward. Like, I don't need you to do that, but like, should I let you, like, that actually would be helpful, you know? And so like, do I trust this person enough where they don't think that, if I say yes, that means like, I couldn't DoorDash my own food or something like that. I don't have that competency or app on my phone, but to create that bridge of trust to say, you know what, this person's just trying to love. This person's just trying to help. This person is just trying to reach out in some way. So, recently Aaron released the book, Anxiety, Depression, and Jesus Finding Hope in All Things. Aaron, why write this book? What kind of compelled you to do that? What's the book about? Just get us into that story and how that kind of all came to be, man.
Yeah, for sure. Several years ago, I started writing about mental health. This has been something that's been super close to my heart over the last couple decades. I've struggled with anxiety and depression and OCD for a long time. I referenced the story earlier about my leg injury that was the first panic attack I've ever had, was in that season. I've had a dozen or more since. And I've just seen such a gap in the conversation on mental health in the church that I feel like the Lord has invited me and asked me to step into. I have read so many books on anxiety and depression, and I did not have any aspiration to go write another book on it because there are plenty out there. However, what I continued to see in reading a book was that I would have this incredible optimism based on the title of the book or the foreword, that this was going to eradicate my anxiety or depression or mental illness in some way. There was always this sense of false hope from the titles I was reading, at least. I'm sure there are really, really good ones out there, but it seemed like every single book I picked up had how to eliminate or how to conquer or how to have victory over mental illness. And every time I shut the back cover thinking it was so unhelpful. It didn't give me any hope in like, what if it persists? Like, what if I still struggle after reading this? What then? What if I apply the 3 tricks that I learned and I'm still struggling? And I would just spiral on those questions of like, I don't think this was helpful at all. So what I started to do was just open up God's word and look at what does the Bible say about anxiety and depression. And I think growing up in the church that my family grew up in, I was naive in thinking it didn't really address it. I think I thought even as a pastor, the Bible was clear that anxiety and depression were not okay. And man, I was shocked when I started reading scripture for what it really says. Yeah. One of the things that just totally knocked me over was reading Jeremiah 15. And in it, Jeremiah says, he's cursing the day that he was born. He says, I wish I was never born. All these people hate me. I'm hated everywhere I go. And he just cries out that his life is misery. And based on what I had heard in the church, if I pause right there and stop reading the story, I'm thinking God is going to respond, Jeremiah, why are you doing this? Jeremiah, why are you being so unfaithful? Why are you so ungrateful? Jeremiah, pray more. Do this thing. Stop it, Jeremiah. Like, that's been my background with mental health, has just been those types of answers in the church to my anxiety, to my depression. Aaron, you need to pray more. Aaron, you need to have more faith. Aaron, you need to give this over to God. You know, Philippians 4, 6, and 7 says, don't be anxious. So Aaron, don't be anxious. I'm like, that's what God's going to say to Jeremiah. God says, Jeremiah, I am with you. I'm always with you. Like that changed my life because I'm like, Jeremiah wishes he was never born. And God's response is, I'm with you. And so it was at that moment that I'm like, more needs to be said on this topic.
Yeah.
Because I never heard that.
Yeah.
20 years of struggling with anxiety, depression, mental illness. I never heard God was with me in the struggle. And that was so powerful for me. Like it changed my life and it changed my trajectory because I thought, you know, there's so many people struggling and we feel like our struggles are, they should go away if we have faith. Yeah. They should go away if we do the right things. And what I see the Bible saying is like struggle and faith can coexist. They actually almost have to. Yeah. To have faith, it is preempted by a struggle that you're having. And you put your faith in God to deliver through those struggles. Yeah. And so I just continued to read countless examples. David says, I flood my bed with tears at night. I flood my bed with tears. I'm like, I do that. And God's response isn't, stop it, David. Like, why are you doing that? Yeah. Why don't you have more faith? It's just on and on the stories of Elijah and Moses and Paul. Paul says, man, we were so burdened beyond our own strength that we despaired of life itself. We're burdened beyond our own strength that we despaired of life itself. I'm like, I've been there a dozen times. I despair of life because I feel so overwhelmed and so overburdened. And again, God's response is just being present, being faithful. And so a few years ago, I started to just write diligently because I saw that in my battles with mental health, writing was such a powerful outlet for me.
Yeah.
There weren't a ton of people I could talk to,
Yeah.
and there weren't a ton of people I felt fully safe to be open with about those struggles. And so as I began to write and continue writing, I realized, okay, God, you're asking me to do something with what I'm writing, what you're putting on my heart. And so last year decided to start to put that together in chapter forms and put it in a book. And God's been so faithful throughout that process to bring it to where we are now. The book is out, and it's such a blessing to me to be able to see God redeeming my story in that way.
Yeah.
Romans 8:28 says God will use all things together for good for those who love him. And there's a spot in depression where you're like, no, not this thing. You can't use this thing.
Yeah.
Like, this is so dark. This is so heavy. You cannot use this. And I know people feel that way with cancer or with other illness or chronic things. That's like, how could you ever use this? Like, I just want to line of sight to how you would be able to. And what I've seen, what I've gotten a front row seat to, is God is using anxiety and depression, some of the hardest things I've ever gone through. He's redeeming them through in other people and through that story. And man, it's to the point now I'm like, I'm grateful for depression. That's wild, because a few years ago I would have been like, nah, this has no hope. No, there's nothing good in this.
Wow.
And now I'm like, God, thank you for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I think there's, one, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage.
yeah,
And also to put that out into the world as a resource, because I think, in my, 15 plus years, and then in the local, working in the local church, but then the stuff that we're doing now, this is a topic that comes up a lot with friends, family members, people in the church, where there's just like a lot of shame around this, and things that are like, okay, let's just keep this over here because we're not exactly sure what to do with it. Or what ends up happening is, like you said, those experiences were like, what's communicated directly or maybe indirectly at times as well is just like, have more faith. Just be happy. This like persona that Christianity is just this up and to the right life is so broken.
yeah,
And it's not just all up and to the right, and like joy means that we're just we're just chipper. But to see the suffering of people like Jeremiah, to see the challenges of people in Scripture, and to know that like the actual truth of like, God's with you.
yeah,
Like that, like God is with you.
Yeah.
And he, in healing or whatever, like this perception of healing, that it's just like, all right, got to have enough faith. We see these episodes in Scripture, boom, this thing just was gone. But to know and taste like the healing solve of Jesus, that he's with us, that he's tender, that he cares, that he's right there in it. That he's not, like you said, having that response of just like, don't be anxious, don't be this, just get rid of it. Right. Just do this, is beautiful and powerful. I'm so glad you shared that. And I know that somebody who's listening, whether it's them or somebody in their life, needed to hear that, or maybe even dive in deeper in ordering the book, and it's, I know it's available on Amazon because it's in my cart. And anxiety, depression, and Jesus, finding hope in all things. And just thank you for being a voice. Thank you for the courage.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story, but then also sharing that kind of insight and wisdom from Scripture that's going to help a lot of people, man. It's amazing.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Aaron, as we start to wrap up our conversation today, what is a book or a podcast? It can't be your own book for this question, but what is
this podcast, and it's my book.
Hey, I will allow it.
We'll allow it.
But what is a book or a podcast that has been really impactful in your life recently, that is just something you could share with our listeners?
Yeah. So I have 3 boys at home, and man, it's such a blessing to be their dad and to get to shepherd them and steward them. Right now I'm reading The Intentional Father by John Tyson. And man, that has been just so good for my relationship with my sons, and knowing that the time, especially in this season right now, like things are super busy at church, super busy with the book and all of that stuff. And it's like, I've got these 3 boys that are just craving time with their dad.
Yeah.
And how can I make that the most intentional time possible
Yeah.
is really at the forefront of my mind. So that's an incredible resource that I would encourage any father to pick up. And it's been such a blessing to me.
That's great. We'll make sure to link that book in the show notes so you can grab that one as well.
So Aaron, how can people find you? You are the least self-promoting person on the planet, but I'm going to push you here. How can people find you? How can they get involved with what you're doing? How can they find your book? How can they find some of the other resources and websites and stuff like that you got going on?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, recently TikTok, venturing into all of that greatness. My website is aaronhooverwrites.com. Okay. So that's probably the easiest way to get linked to everything else and linked to the book, aaronhooverwrites.com.
Awesome.
Awesome.
And you can find the book on Amazon. Is that the primary place to probably get it?
Yeah.
Awesome. And so, that's, again, Anxiety, Depression, and Jesus, Finding Hope in All Things by Aaron Hoover. Would highly recommend that you grab that for yourself or somebody that in your life that could maybe benefit from it. Well, we want to say thanks for tuning into this episode of the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast by Wayfinders. We hope it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life.
Yeah, and we'd love for you to continue to join us on this journey. You can subscribe to the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Throwing in Google there for this week.
Absolutely. And we just want to say, Aaron, thank you so much. Thanks for your story. Thanks for sharing and putting this resource into the world. And it's just super fun to get to know you a little bit better. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.